The first one I'm going to demonstrate is a graded wash on dry. I pulled some paint from my well of colors and I'm adding water to it. That is a very important thing to remember with watercolor. Water is the big part of it. What you'll do is you'll start, your brush will be loaded up. It's called charging your brush, and you will go from one side to the other. Now, I like to hold my paper at an angle and let that paint drip on down. And this is called a wet on dry. And you'll notice that as I let it go, the drips can make a dramatic and interesting effect. But you'll also notice that everywhere where I did the brush and did a little overlap, you're going to see a bit of a difference of color. The next one I'm going to demonstrate is a wash on wet paper. So I need to wet my paper down. And in order to do that, I need to have a clean brush. So as I rinse out my brush, I keep a paper towel next to me and I wipe it on there till I see that I have it fairly clean. I'm not too concerned about having a little bit of blue in here because I will be painting it with blue. So I'm going to wet down my paper. You have to work fairly quickly so that your paper doesn't dry out as you're working. Charge up your brush and then do the same thing. Paint your as you go down. Now you'll notice that I'm not reloading the brush at all. I am just using the paint that is on the brush currently. Depending upon how good you are at doing this, it can look better. If you feel like you don't have enough paint on there, you can come up and you can add some more in. I have my round brush. I've dipped it in the water to get it a little bit wet before I grab my paint. I'm going to pull some of my paint off of my tray and put it over here. Your paint will dry on your tray as you're working it, and that is not a problem. You just bring it back to life by putting more water on it. So I want to have a good amount of water on here. And you'll notice that my color is kind of muddy because instead of dipping into my clean water, I dipped into my dirty water, so it got a little bit of blue on it. This is how I would do, and this just to show you what happens when you put wet onto dry paper. Take that second color. You don't ever want this paint to be thick. You always want to water it down. That's the whole point. If you need to color darker, you layer it in successive layers, just like you would do with colored pencil. Now I'm going to do this one right next to it. And I touched it a little bit. So as you can see, it started to bleed some. If I get my paper wet first, you can see that it really bleeds out a lot more. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll really load up my brush and then I'll just tap it and let it drip down and make circles because I just think that looks really cool. I bet you could even take a little bit of water in a spritzer and spritz it or spray it. And usually what I like to do is I like to start with it laying down on there and then lift as I get further up the paper. And I like create tree branches right now. Sometimes I'll even pull towards myself because I find it easier to do than to go the opposite direction. When you start out with the sea sponge, you need to have it be damp. Make sure you squeeze it out really well. Then you need to come over to your paint. We're just going to do like a quickie fall tree here. And you need to pick up some paint onto the sponge. And I like to pick up more than one color at a time. And then I come over here and I just dab it onto my paper. And that is called sponging. Sponging can give you some nice texture. Lifting works best when the paper is still wet or damp. If it's completely dry, it will not work as well. I'm back with my brush, clean brush, and I wipe it off as I go, and you can see that I'm able to lift paint out of there. This technique is called scraping. Using the sharp edge of the back of your paintbrush or whatever you want to, you can take and just scrape along and get some nice, interesting textures, create some foliage behind your little guy, put some grass in there. Sprinkle salt onto the painted wet surface, and the salt will start to attract the color and create an interesting texture. When it's all dry, you'll brush the salt off. When using the fan brush, you'll load it up and you'll see it separate out into almost like little fingers. When you use this, you can pull like that and get a really nice striped line texture. This is what we refer to as somewhat of dry brushing. The other thing a fan brush does is it can make, depending upon how you put it on there, it can make nice texture that might look like trees, or you might get a cloud texture or whatever you're going. This technique is referred to as dry brush. I've mixed some paint here that's a little thicker than the watered down paint that I would do for a wash. I started with a fairly dry brush and now I'm dabbing off most of that paint. And what I want to do is just take my brush and drag it along there. Notice at the beginning it is not very dry. It's when it gets to the end that it gets the telltale characteristics of dry brush. To speed up your process, you can use a hair dryer. This is the salt. Now I can brush off that salt and I get this really sweet texture. The very last one that I'm going to show you is called splattering. Load your brush with a lot of watery paint, and then you take your finger out and hold it like this and put the brush on it, and then move anything you don't want splatters on. Just go like this, and it'll like put little splattered dots on there. I often use this when I'm creating a creek bed and want rocks or sand. It looks nice with sand too.